No, I haven't. And funny that you went straight there because that's actually one of the things I was curious about is you've got quite young kids. And so it's only been what, the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
And so prior to that, you're pretty consistent training. You've got long training history, trained up to quite a decent level. Then suddenly you've got the kids, right? And so I've trained loads of clients with kids as well. And and I don't have kids. And so I guess my point of curiosity is how has training changed for you since having children?
The million-dollar question. I think as you said, before having kids, trained in quite a few different modalities. I've done quite a lot of bodyweight stuff. I've done some endurance stuff. Done your sort of like bog standard kind of bodybuilding, a little bit of powerlifting, that sort of thing. But obviously, like when kids come along, your priorities do shift, and also the amount of time that you have available as well to put into that. Probably the biggest mistake that most people make is they know how they used to train back when they didn't have that, like didn't have family, didn't have those time pressures. Their priorities were just on, maybe not just on that, but more so geared towards that. And that's the only approach that they know. So then if they have a period off, they come back and try and fit that sort of that kind of program, that way of training to like their circumstances now, and it just doesn't work. A lot of people really, really struggle with a kind of all or nothing mindset because they're like, I know I got great results when I was training 5, 6 days a week. I was eating this, I was doing that. But like the reality of it is it's just not feasible to fit that into their current lifestyle. So they're like, they try and do it, maybe do it for a week or so and realize completely burnt out, or just like they have that all or nothing mindset. So it's like they either do that or they do nothing at all. When in actual fact, one of the biggest things that I realized from my experience going through this process was actually the amount that you need to do from a training perspective to like at very least maintain, if not still make a little bit of progress over time is actually really quite little. And actually when I scale things back, I almost end up getting better results for a period because I didn't have this kind of residual fatigue, and the stuff that I was doing, quality was there, the intensity and the intent behind the training was there because I knew I didn't have much time and I wanted to get the absolute most out of the time that I did have. So rather than trying to do like all these sets per week, but they're like actually not ending up pushing them that hard, it became doing a lot less, but making sure that I was everything I was doing, the intensity was what it needed to be. And that meant that the results I got from doing far less were actually, like I said, equatable, if not slightly better in certain points, because I wasn't constantly beaten up from the training that I had been doing.
In line with what I've observed with people with kids is they drop off massively because they can't actually keep up with the training that they used to do before. And there's almost this idea of like I can't do it because I can't get to the gym 5 times a week. I'm not able to push as hard. Force production isn't there. I'm feeling really tired. I'm not being able to spend 2 hours in the gym and just like enjoy myself. Having to do these, having to go through that adjustment to maybe training 2 to 3 times a week, having a slightly shorter session, being a lot more concise with what you're doing, that doesn't hit everybody straight away. And I think that's actually a very important message to get out to people that do have kids and are starting to wonder when are they ever going to get back to being able to train the way that they used to and also get back to the level of fitness that they used to have, because it's very possible. It just means that they have to completely change their approach towards it. And I've been lucky with the clients that I work with. I often see them like twice a week, 1 to 2 times a week, and I have maybe another 1 or 2 sessions programmed for them that they do by themselves. And on average, they train 3 times a week. And I've been training some of these people for 3 up to 5 years. And year on year, we make progress. And they continue to get stronger and they continue to get fitter. And they continue to accrue whatever other sort of physique goals that they have. And it's been a huge eye opener for me because I don't have kids, and I do, well, up until recently, I did have a lot more time on my hands, and I was training 5 times a week. And I'm looking at my clients making lots of progress, and I wasn't making anywhere near as much. And I'm like, I've got it so right with these guys, programming wise, and I completely suck for myself. The only time I've really seen significant progress was whenever I've like kind of worked with an external coach, when I worked with you guys during the hybrid days, and I've worked with Ali separately as well, and just completely outsourcing the programming to somebody else has made a huge difference. Like, what kind of feedback have you had from the people that you've trained who are all in a similar position with kids?
Exactly the same, mate. And it's like, so some of, because I coach some people in the gym still, and then the rest is online. And I think it's one of those things, most of them can't train more than 2 or 3 times a week, but you are still seeing that progress coming through over time because what they're doing, the quality and the intent is behind that. And one other thing I sometimes use with people who need that little bit more flexibility, so this is normally online clients, is setting up a program that is a bit more flexible. So rather than like Monday, this is your session, Wednesday, this is your session, Friday, this is your session. And what I sometimes do is have like a non-negotiable checklist of stuff for people to tick off, and I put it together as sessions. But given the context that it's like each week we want to be doing 3 to 4 hard sets on a push or pull, something quad dominant, something hip dominant. If we can fit it together in this way, great. If it ends up being different to that, don't worry about it. But having a non-negotiable checklist for stuff that you can do every single week, feeding into that all or nothing mindset that a lot of people do have, is it like they look at that top end, like if you have the perfect week, what would that look like? Oh, I'm training 5-6 days a week, I'm doing this, I'm doing whatever. But actually they don't consider what the lowest level that they're willing to hold themselves to is. And actually, if you have a fallback option for like, if, I don't know, kids aren't sleeping or work's really busy, or just for whatever reason like you don't have the normal amount of time that you do, having something that you can do given that situation, I think it's a really nice way to get around that sort of all or nothing mindset.
Non-negotiable checklist that you, and I want you to talk about that a tiny little bit more, because I think that's something that's probably very, very, very useful, because you're actually kind of you're taking the actual training program and you're creating a bit more flexibility based on all these unplanned scenarios, right? You didn't know that your kids were going to wake you up in the middle of the night. You didn't know that your child was going to forget something and you had to go like drop everything and drop that thing to them at school or whatever. And the training sessions can be affected by so many different things. And even with people without kids, I've definitely found that if you set them a program and they try their best to stick to the sets and the reps and the percentage 1RM that you've given them, right? And sometimes on that day, that wasn't the best thing to do, but to actually highlight, look, worst case scenario, we're just aiming for this much work consistently. And I'm going to guess you've measured that was a sustainable amount. I've not actually come across or heard anybody doing that before, so I'm really curious about what that has looked like and like actual examples of it.
So in terms of that, I've done quite a bit of research just on like minimum effective dose from a training perspective in sort of different modalities. It depends on the person and their goals, and the sort of very bare minimum level of that, I normally look to hit between 2 and 4 hard sets per muscle group per week. Realistically, that's like broken down into an upper body push and pull, something quad dominant, something hip dominant, and that would be sort of like the bare bones of it. And then 20 minutes of CV work, just because I think CV is something that a lot of people do end up overlooking. And obviously, running's not everyone's cup of tea, but actually doing some form of aerobic work on a weekly basis is going to be so beneficial. And running, for me in particular, is just like the lowest barrier to entry thing you can do. You don't need any kit. You literally just need a pair of trainers. And if it's like I've not done any CV in the week, to put my trainers on, run for 10 minutes out the door, and then run 10 minutes back just to kind of tick that box for the week. It to me just makes a lot of sense to have something as simple as that, as like that low barrier kind of entry point. And it was something I really noticed when, after my eldest Zach was born, I stopped running for a period just because I was struggling to fit it in and the usual stuff. But when I came back to it, I really noticed that difference. Whereas when my second came along, I stuck to that, just do at least 20 minutes. And like, whilst I didn't necessarily make any progress, when I did come back to having a bit more time to put like a bit more emphasis on it, the difference that I felt going into those sessions was astronomical. Obviously, everyone sort of bangs on about consistency, but if you can just do something every week to keep that level of consistency there, when you are able to potentially prioritize it a little bit more, or if there comes a time in your life where you want to prioritize it a little bit more, you're in a much, much better position to go and do that if you've been kind of ticking along and chipping away. Like some weeks it might just be like maintaining, some weeks it might be like doing enough that you can like push on and progress a little bit. When you get to that point of being able to do a little bit more or wanting to do a little bit more, you're in a much better position to do that. The best way to kind of stay in shape all the time is not have those big spikes of like, I'm entering an event, I've got to stacking loads and loads of training into it, get to the event, finishing it, hating training because you've been doing so much, dropping off, not doing anything for ages, and then just having like kind of peaks and trough cycle that I think a lot of people do go through with.
Starting over again. So, like, to recap, 2 to 4 hard sets and 20 minutes of cardiovascular work a week as a base minimum. Is that right? Okay. And that sounds like super, super doable. Assuming somebody, when we're talking about hard sets, what types of exercises would you need to have the skill to be able to do something like a barbell squat or a barbell deadlift, or would it be okay to be doing that hard set on like a machine, like a leg press?
Yeah, so it obviously depends on the level people are at, and also to a certain extent, sort of like what the goal is. Like generally, I focus them mostly around compound lifts, just because you've got obviously the added benefit of sort of the bracing, the work you'll get through your trunk, that sort of thing. More sort of personal preference. It could be a squat, it could be a leg press, it could be a split squat of some variation, it could be any of those things. And then like from a hinge perspective, be a deadlift. Quite often I like an RDL because you can load it up heavy. Probably going to be a little bit less fatiguing for you than full deadlifts. And obviously, unless you're focusing on controlling that eccentric with the deadlift, you're probably going to get a little bit better stimulus to your glutes, your hamstrings from doing RDLs. If we're talking sort of about a hypertrophy stimulus, generally focus them around sort of a big compound lift. There's no kind of hard and fast rules on that. For me, it's about putting it together in a way that's doable and enjoyable for the person in front of me. And something you've sort of mentioned a couple of times, the sleep side of things, which is and does impact massively when children aren't sleeping. And that there definitely is a performance element to that in terms of performance dropping off from lack of sleep. But the biggest thing that lack of sleep will impact acutely is your desire to train. So quite often it overcoming that is actually like just finding the easiest way for you to get into your session and removing as many barriers as possible to that. If that's doing a leg press rather than loading up a back squat, cool, go and do that. Don't sort of stress the minutiae of it. And then if you get like a period of like sleeping a little bit better and want to kind of push on and do sort of more barbell stuff, then cool, go and do that. Yeah, I remember, but neither of mine have slept particularly well. And there has been sessions where like the thought of doing like some heavy split squats or heavy squats has just made me not want to train. Whereas jumping on leg press, do a couple of warm up sets, and then you're into working sets, was much easier to kind of stomach. So it was the thing that I did because it made it easier for me to stay consistent with that.
Yeah, I think whenever somebody who, like, I know is not really into the gym, has a full-time job, family, and all the rest of it, and they're kind of wondering, how do I even kind of get into the gym? I always think about like the most lowest barrier to entry, the easiest access point. And even with clients who have had a rough night's sleep and they're coming in and they basically told me I didn't sleep too well last night or whatever, if I've got like a compound lift plan that day, I do often just swap for a machine just because I know they're going to be able to push hard enough on there. There's pretty low risk of injury. Concentration doesn't need to be anywhere near as high. There's a minimal amount of skill involved here, and it's a lot easier to manage the load. And I'll do like you do the same for yourself, I'm sure, and I do exactly the same for myself. I had the exact same experience where I can't be bothered. I want the least amount of mental work I can have to deal with, and sometimes machines and bicep curls kind of do the job, right?
Definitely, there's definitely been. I've started with bicep curls. I want to train now, but I like the thought of doing it is not like I wouldn't have done it unless I started with something that I was like, actually, yeah, I'm just going to go and get a bit of a pump, because normally once you're into it, it's easier to keep going. And sometimes that does mean start with arms.
For sure.